Today, I'm gonna walk you through the exact compensation structure that I've set up across 100 different sales organizations to keep the top salespeople from even thinking about leaving or going somewhere else. And I'm not gonna talk about paying them more, because who can do that? That's lazy and it doesn't actually even solve anything. In fact, it actually makes the problem worse. What I'm talking about is creating a layered system where every piece of the comp plan is designed to make it wildly more expensive for them to walk away. We do not want our best reps to walk out the door, and most of it has nothing to do with how much you're actually paying them. Because the reality is every good salesperson first judges the job based on how much money they're likely to make. And if your comp structure is not built in their favor on that, you're just hoping that they stay. And hope is not a strategy. All right, now, before we actually get into the actual comp structure itself, I wanna get something right out of the way. Because if you're one of these assholes out here thinking that you can hire a salesperson that can be 100% commission only, none of what I'm going to walk you through is going to matter, because that's not how you run a real sales organization. Because if you're trying to run a real business, one that's gonna be worth something one day, you need in-house salespeople that are on payroll, not contractors, not 1099. And that's the simple answer. So you need a salesperson with a base salary because you're committing to that person that you're going to employ them and you're going to give them some level of stability and security, okay? Because you're investing in their future and that they have a vested interest in their own personal well-being. And in return, now you can ask them to commit to certain behaviors and activities that are going to lead to the success of the company. That's a fair exchange. Whereas a contractor who's 100% commission only, they don't owe you anything because there's no fair exchange. If they don't sell something, what are you gonna say to them? You're only paying them after they sell. So in their eyes, they've got no obligation to you, and that mentality best serves for a very short-term gain. It reduces your risk on paper, but it substantially sacrifices the long-term growth of the business. Now look, there's gonna be a lot of people here that are gonna tell you, oh, that there's a whole ecosystem of high-ticket sales closers out there, they're college educated, they're professional, they're ready to go. But the reality is most of these high-ticket losers, these closers, are just young dudes living in what I like to call passport bro lifestyles. They're living in Bogota or somewhere, South America, Dubai, Philippines. They're gonna try and hit that 4-hour work week, that Tim Ferriss dream, to try and fund their party lifestyle and hang out with ladyboys all day long. They're fixated on getting their commission rather than doing the job itself. Fast cash, fast money. I've seen this happen over and over again in organizations where they hire these people and they end up dealing with a lot of reputational damage after the fact because these alleged hired guns just went out there and just basically wanted to sell anything. They said anything and everything, made a whole bunch of commitments without truly understanding the problem that they were trying to solve. And look here, I'm not one of these old men that's, oh, back in my day, 1984. Look, I started my career in door-to-door sales. I was paid exclusively off commission, no base salary. So I'm not speaking from theory here, but those days are long gone. Look at the job market, what it is. Any asshole that's prepared to take a 100% commission-only role that doesn't have a 7-figure OTE, I'm not about to touch them with a 10-foot pole, and neither should you. All right, now that we've established that you need this W-2 salesperson on your real payroll, the first decision we need to figure out is how you're gonna split up the base salary from the variable compensation. Because if you get this ratio wrong, you're gonna create lazy sales reps or desperate ones. Both are bad. The best comp structures that I've seen have a fixed base salary along with the variable compensation component. And the total of those are what we're gonna call on-target earnings, or OTE. The ratio between those two numbers really do matter more than what people think, and it does shift depending on the role and the level of the role that we're talking about. Look, on the higher side for a junior or maybe a mid-market rep who are selling smaller deals at a higher volume, the base salary should not be more than about 60% of total on-target earnings. So something like 60K base salary and 40,000 in variable comp. So we're looking at about 100K OTE. And look, at that level, that works just fine. But once you start getting into 6 figures, that ratio does need to be adjusted and tightened up. And I would say to at a minimum about 50-50 split. Okay, so we're talking about 100K base salary and $100,000 in variable. So we're looking at about 200K in total on-target earnings. And as you climb that higher and higher, the ratio should actually start to invert, where the variable portion becomes the bigger number. All right, so if the base salary is, let's say, about 200K, the on-target earnings should be probably, in my opinion, somewhere around 600,000. So meaning that the variable comp is about $400,000. That's how you get to your 600, 200 and 400, 600, okay? And the reason why this matters so much is because if you're gonna be paying somebody $200,000 base salary and it's only $100,000 variable comp, What do you think is gonna happen with the salesperson? They're gonna get very comfortable. They're gonna just start living off of that 200K, and that whatever additional variable income that they get, that's just gravy. Look, no matter what they sit here and tell you in the interview about, oh, I'm used to making $500,000, so this 200K that I'm getting, oh, it's not gonna sustain me. Like, I'm gonna tell you firsthand, that's not true. Every single salesperson that's ever told me that, I already know that's bullshit. Look, the reality is they're gonna coast off of that base salary if you let them, and you will have paid a premium for someone who's performing like that, making half of that number, okay? Now, you gotta make sure this is where you get the split right, and most agency owners get the math wildly wrong. And it's the reason why they think they're actually profitable on a salesperson when in fact they're losing money. The quota for a salesperson should be at a bare minimum, at least 15 times their annual on-target earnings. Okay, so let me give you an example. So if the base salary is $60,000 and hitting quota gets them an additional $40,000 in variable comp, so now that person's OTE is $100,000, that means that their quota should be $1.5 million for the year. If you're looking at somebody and you're gonna give them $200,000 in base and $600,000 OTE, that person's quota should realistically be $9 million, which breaks down to $2.25 million per quarter. And if they're not able to hit that number, you should not have them around for very long because you're not gonna be profitable. Now, when I tell people this, they hear these numbers and they think it sounds very aggressive because the standard wisdom out there is, maybe 5 to 7x, and if you can get to 11x, you're amazing. But think about that. So if you're gonna be sitting here paying somebody $100 grand, and if that person brings in anywhere between $500 to $700,000, do you really believe that you're gonna be profitable on them? And if you do, then that math is just wrong because it doesn't actually account for the full picture of what that salesperson actually costs you, okay? Look, you've got the cost of sales, which is the commission itself and the cost of floating that individual. But on top of that, you've got lead acquisition costs because these deals didn't just appear out of thin air. Then on top of that, you've got delivery costs, right? Because somebody actually has to fulfill what was sold. Then you got your overhead. And on top of all of that, you need to account for the fact that not everything that this lunatic is gonna sell for you is actually gonna stick. So then you're gonna have to factor in some level of churn. And even if you're gonna tell me, which you should be, clawing back that commission on that churned client, there's still a number of man hours that were spent on onboarding that client and the delivery of that client before they left. And you're never gonna get those back. The base salary is not recoverable. The benefits you're paying this individual, that's not recoverable. And the employment taxes, the carrying costs of that person, those are not recoverable. So when you start stacking all of these costs together, 5 to 7x doesn't leave you with much money at all, if any. And that's assuming if all of these clients stick around for a 12-month agreement, which is a generous assumption most of you have. That's why the right number is 15x at a minimum. And in the agency world specifically, I'd like to argue that it's probably closer to 20x, because if you can't get ROI positive on a salesperson within the first 12 months of that contract, you're amortizing a cost over 2, maybe even 3 years. And that's the reason why most agencies are always in a cash crunch with no profit. All right, so now that you got the base to variable ratio right, and the quota is set at a number that actually makes you money, none of this will matter, because if your best rep hits quota on the 20th of the month and then sandbags until the 1st because there's no incentive to keep pushing, you're in a little bit of trouble. The compensation structure needs to have accelerators built into it. And the way that you build them in matters more than the fact that you have them in at all. Look, the base commission is whatever commission that you've set for your industry and for your role. So let's just go ahead and say, easy number, 5%. The rep gets paid 5% of every dollar that they bring in up to their quota. But once they have hit or exceeded that quota for the month or the quarter, the commission rate should jump. So then instead of 5%, now they're gonna turn around and make 7% on everything over that quota. But here's the part that most people get wrong. And it's the difference between whether an accelerator actually works versus one that just creates that sandbagging problem. That additional 2%. That 7% needs to be paid retroactive to every dollar sold for that entire period, not just on the overage. This is what people get wrong. And the reason why, it's just very simple. Because if my monthly quota is 100K and I've already hit it, and I've got now another $25,000 deal that's set to come in, the difference between me getting that 7% on just that $25,000 versus getting it on that 7% on that full $125,000, it's massive. So if I'm only gonna get that bump on that 25K, I don't know, it's not really motivating, right? And this is where you're gonna end up getting that salesperson to sandbag and wait until the next month and slow roll that there because I gotta hit that number again next month. But if I get 7% retroactive on that entire 125K, now there's some real financial stake, for real financial reason for me to make sure that, to make that push and make sure that deal comes in before the clock runs out. And that's where ultimately your sandbagging problem is gonna go away. Okay, so now on top of that, this is where we can start to get really creative and start layering in additional kickers. And honestly, I hate giving this industry any sort of credit, but this is what the car industry has done really well with decades of spiffs. If you know that your buyers tend to buy at the beginning or at the end of the month, and that middle of the month is you've got that natural lag, this is where you can start putting additional percentages on anything sold in between there, ensuring that window. So for example, let's say roughly from like the 9th to the 20th of the month, anything that your rep sells gets an extra point on top of the base commission. So let's just say if the base is 5%, they're gonna get 6% on any deal that closes in that middle month window, right? And now if they've exceeded the quota on top of that and anything that stacks on with the accelerator, so during that middle period, they're gonna start making 8% on that deal in that period, right? So now this is gonna eliminate that mid-month drag where the reps just coast and wait for the deals to come or let the natural attrition kick it over. And the reason this whole approach works is because the best salespeople are very crafty. And this kind of structure gamifies a system that keeps them interested. It keeps them engaged and keeps them excited about finding new ways to maximize their earnings. They love playing those games, and this is exactly what you're doing for them. So now that you've got a comp structure that motivates your reps and allows them to sell more and faster, but that only solves half the problem, because a great comp plan that pays out immediately still gives your best reps the freedom to be able to walk away clean whenever they want. I want them here, I want those golden handcuffs. So the second component of this variable compensation should go beyond just straight commission. It should be bonuses tied to them not only hitting those certain numbers, whether that's quarterly or annually, but the key to making sure that those bonuses actually work as a retention tool is that you need to delay the bonus payout for, at the very minimum, 1 quarter. Because here's what's gonna happen. When you do that, the rep has 1 quarter, great quarter, they hit their numbers and they earn their bonus, but they don't get paid that bonus for another 3 months from now. So now that they're already into the next quarter, working on the next bonus, they've still got that money from that last quarter that they haven't collected yet. And that just keeps on rolling because every single quarter, there's a bonus sitting there that they're waiting on. And if they leave before it pays out, they lose it. This is ultimately what's gonna create these golden handcuffs, because there's always gonna be money on the table that they don't want to walk away from, leaving it behind. So now here's the thing, the enforcement mechanism behind this is something that every single high-level sales organization uses, and it's very straightforward. You need to be gainfully employed and in good standing in order to qualify for any of your bonuses. So if a rep decides to leave before they get their bonus payout, they don't get it, even if they've earned it. And it's not just about leaving. If they stop selling, if they start coasting, and you need to put them on a performance improvement plan, a PIP, they no longer qualify for that bonus, even if they've already earned it on paper. You need to be in good standing at the time of receipt, not just the time you locked it in. This is something that's standard across all high-level professional organizations, so you should be no different. Okay, and I wanna be very clear about something, because a lot of people will hear this and they think that it sounds harsh or that I'm being a little too mean. Running your organization this way is not bad. I repeat, all high-level sales organizations, professional companies operate this way, and there's nothing wrong with holding your people to a standard where they need to continue to perform and remain in good standing in order to collect what they've already earned. Okay, and now the last piece of this, and this is somehow the piece that most people overlook because it feels very surface level, and it seems like it shouldn't matter, but it does trigger something completely different in how a salesperson thinks about leaving. One of the things I've seen work at other organizations that we've implemented that works incredibly well is providing simple things like car allowances or cell phone budgets to their reps. Look, the reality is paying somebody an extra $1,500 in salary isn't going to earn their loyalty on their own. It's just not enough money to keep somebody around. But here's what happens when you give it to them specifically as a car allowance or a stipend. You tell them it's $1,500 for a monthly car lease. They'll go out there and get themselves an Audi R8 or whatever it is, and it's gonna cost them, let's call it $1,900 a month, because in their mind, they think they're only paying $400 out of pocket cash because you're giving them $1,500. But if they leave, now that car payment jumps from $400 a month to $1,900. Just that little friction alone is gonna keep them around a little bit longer. Otherwise, they would have stayed. And when you start to stack that on top of everything else that they've got, that's where the full picture starts to come in. Now you've gamified this comp structure with accelerators and spiffs that keep them excited. You've delayed their bonuses, which ties them in and keeps them wanting to sell to get their payout. And they keep stacking that and getting all of this in reserve. Plus, you give them lifestyle perks that they feel like they're getting for free, because these are expenses that now they don't have to pay for. They would have had to pay for anyways, but now if they leave you, it means picking up the full cost of that lifestyle that they've already locked themselves into. Those are the golden handcuffs that you want, and they strictly come from a great compensation structure standpoint. These are very simple things you can put in place today to prevent your best performing reps from leaving and keep them around a little bit longer. Now look, if you're running an agency that's doing 7 figures or more in revenue and you're dealing with all sorts of turnover and inconsistency with your sales team, and you feel like it's making it impossible to build any real momentum, my company, Rose Garden Consulting, we do a simple sales assessment where we come in and look at everything, your comp structure, your hiring process, your sales operation, and we will give you a clear path forward on what needs to change and how to change it. This is not theory. It's not a course. It's actually me and my team coming in to diagnose what's actually broken and showing you exactly step by step with a framework on how to fix it. If that sounds like something that you might want to look at, click the link in the description below. Compensation is one of those things that people either overcomplicate or just completely ignore. And either way, you end up losing the people on your team that actually make you money. Take what I walked you through today and audit it against what you're currently doing, because I promise you, there's at least 1 or 2 of the things that I mentioned here that if you implement will make an immediate difference in your company. I'll see you on the next one.